Welcome, everyone. Everyone is arriving. We'll give you a moment to trickle in and get set up. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for an artist talk by Elise Rasmussen. My name is Zoe Strecker. I'm an art professor here at Transylvania, and I currently hold a Bingham Young professorship with a 2-year project called Crucial Terrain: Ecological Flourishing, Environmental Crisis, and Regenerative Culture in the Face of the Climate Crisis. Tonight's lecture is the first in my series for this winter term. And please join us for upcoming Crucial Terrain events this year. The schedule can be found at the website, which I will in just a little bit post on our chat. And also the website is permanently available on the Academic Dean's page on Transylvania's website. Before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. Please note that we do have live captioning. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a live transcript button, and if you just click on that, you'll get the captions. Also, we will have 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, and you're invited to use the Q&A box just anytime during the presentation this evening. If you have a question or comment, we will get to just as many of those as we possibly can at the end. Elise Rasmussen is an artist who works with lens-based media and grounds her practice in extensive research. Her artwork, A Year Without Summer, the focus of tonight's talk, is a video investigation of the origins of Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, published in 1816. This project makes fascinating connections to the themes of my Crucial Terrain project, as well as to the current exhibition titled Flux in Transylvania's Morlan Gallery. Morlan is once again open to the public on weekdays from noon to 5, so please come and see the show. Elise has exhibited, performed, and screened her work internationally from New York City to Berlin, Germany, in venues such as the Brooklyn Museum, the Queens Museum, and many, many others. She received her MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago on a merit scholarship, and has been an artist in residence at a number of stellar institutions, including the Irish Museum of Modern Art in Dublin, Lebec in Switzerland, and the Nyrox Foundation in South Africa. She was a 2016 fellow in the prestigious Art and Law program in New York City. Elise has been written about in publications such as Art Forum International, Art in America, Bomb Magazine, and The New Inquiry, and has received numerous grants and awards. Born in Edmonton, Canada, Elise is currently based in Los Angeles, California. We are absolutely thrilled and honored to have her with us this evening, so please join me in welcoming Elise Rasmussen. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I feel that you did my job a little easier because now I don't have to introduce myself so much. So I'm going to start tonight by introducing a little bit of the film component of The Year Without a Summer. Then I'm going to turn it over and screen the film. The film is approximately 20 minutes. And then after, I'll return and continue my slideshow, investigating a little bit into that. So let me just share with you. Okay. So as Zoe mentioned, I'm a research-based artist, primarily working with mediums of photography and film. And usually my work revolves some sort of historical moment and thinking about ways that I can connect that to our current moment to try to think about having a more deeper and holistic worldview. Tonight, like I said, I'm going to mainly show you works from The Year Without a Summer, and I'll also contextualize that a little bit with prior works that I've made. And if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about a project that I've just started embarking upon. So The Year Without a Summer takes its title from 1816, which was a period in history that brought forth extreme weather conditions around the globe. And this was particularly felt in Switzerland, where there was a massive food shortage brought about by crop failure due to the bad weather. And this resulted in acts of filicide as well as famine. At the same time, this created a shift in the kind of artwork that was being made. A lot of romantic art came into prominence. There were a lot of shifts in the style that was being created at this point. And it also prompted Mary Shelley's writing of Frankenstein, which is the first work of science fiction. And it's the primary focus of the piece. What wasn't known in 1816 was that the cause of this dramatic shift in weather was due to the eruption of Mount Tambora a year prior on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia. This not only had a devastating effect as ashes blew across Asia, Europe, and parts of North America, and it created these apocalyptic effects that I just mentioned. And so my film and the photographs that correspond with this piece revisit this history while also considering my own position as an artist in a time of climate crisis. A little bit of the mechanics in the piece in 2019 is when I started to go about the production mode. I traveled to both Mount Tambora in Indonesia and to Lake Geneva, where Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. And I spent time there filming, photographing to create the crux of this work. And when I came to the editing process, I started kind of weaving my own reflections and experiences into this piece. So with that, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to play the film for you, and then I'll rejoin you and talk a little bit more.
2 centuries ago, 1815, on Sumbawa, a small island in the Java Sea, Mount Tambora erupted. The largest eruption in recorded history. The effects of its explosion reverberated around the globe. The Sumbawans believed that Tambora's eruption was retribution for the colonization of their land by the white man, and perhaps this retribution was twofold. For the following year, and for the 2 thereafter, violence and famine plagued Europe, and many suffered a slow death due to poor harvests caused by unimaginable weather. The following summer, 1816, on the shores of Lake Geneva, a group of young literati, an experimentally minded circle, gathered in a home, Diodati. Through boredom brought on by the terrible weather, they were sequestered indoors instead of living out their romanticized aspirations for a summer abroad, away from English society. The circle read ghost stories and hatch a plan to create their own. A contest. To see which of these talented men would write the most bone-chilling thriller of all. Undermining the woman in their cadre, Mary would write the story that would surpass and change literary history. Frankenstein. Riding on the back of dirt bikes to Rick's guest house, along the steep red terrain at the volcano's base, Nick plays with Bolo, and I vomit through the night. The violence of which calls to mind reenactment rituals and ruches they made through fou. The problematics of making a work in another country, and the colonial nature embedded in the camera. Seemingly the only white foreigners in an island devoid of tourists, this island, Sumbawa, isolated in contrast from Bali, where we first landed. Knowing it's just a matter of time and it will soon be like its neighbor, as travelers look for a more authentic Indonesian experience.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of start tonight letting you know a little bit more about the impetus for the project, where the starting point was for this piece. And so a couple years prior to making The Year Without a Summer, I had made a body of work called Do You Know Blue Had No Name? This project looks at various historical narratives related to blueness, thinking about blue through various different lenses, the color blue and the relationship between that and mountaineering, early photographic technologies, and how knowledge is ascribed and recorded. Part of the project brought me to Chamonix in the French Alps and to Geneva in Switzerland to research and shoot. And so a good part of the center, or the crux of the project, focuses on the first expedition to the top of Mont Blanc, which is the highest peak in the Alps, and how this was enabled by the Swiss scientist Horace Benedict de Saussure in the late 1700s. And one of the reasons that Saussure was interested in climbing to the top of Mont Blanc was because he wanted to test out some theories, one of them being his cyanometer, which you can see here, at a high altitude. The cyanometer was a device. It's like a small disc, maybe like a little bit, maybe head size or so. And it was, kind of has different shades of blue. And it was a device that he had created to measure the blueness of the sky. And he had a theory that the higher up that you went, the deeper the blue, the clearer, the crisper, the more true the blue, in a sense. And so he created a number of different cyanometers, and these are housed at the Bibliothèque de Genève, the library in Geneva. And I went there to film and photograph those as well. And so while I was in Geneva and I was walking around the city, I started seeing a number of references to Frankenstein, such as the sculpture that you see, which is kind of in the main square. There was also a bar named the Mary Shelley, something like that. And at first I was a little confused to why. And I had to think back, and I had read Frankenstein in my first year of university, but I forgot most of it. But I did vaguely recall that Dr. Frankenstein was from Geneva. I'd forgotten that most of the book takes place in the Alps. But the main thing that I recalled were the circumstances around which Mary Shelley had written the book. And this kind of harkens back a little bit to just like what drives me as an artist in some ways. I'm often curious about the backstory of how does an artist come up with their idea? What is the backstory of how a work is made? And one of the reasons I was very drawn to this book, or the story, the backstory, especially when I read it in my first year of university, when I was 18, was that Mary Shelley was the same age that I was when she wrote the book. And the fact that this came out of a ghost story competition between her and her friends because the weather was bad and they basically had to find a way to pass the time was also really interesting, that to think through this idea of like, well, what if these circumstances weren't there? Would this incredible work of fiction, which became the first work of science fiction, which still holds so much weight and resonance today, would that ever have been created? And so while I was in Geneva, I brought up this Frankenstein, the statue, and other references to a Swiss friend there. And she was the one who first told me about the weather phenomena and the link that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein had to Tambora, because I hadn't heard about this before. And the same friend also let me know about this new residency program that was just about to open in the small little village called the Tour de Paix on Lake Geneva. It's about an hour or so outside of Geneva, the city. I know some of you are artists that are in the audience, but those who aren't and maybe are not familiar, an artist residency is generally a place that invites artists to come, to stay, to make work. There's often different circumstances, whether you have to produce a specific project or if you just have like time and space to think. But I've found this to be really fruitful to my practice. It gives me time to just concentrate, to be in the place. And so I seek this out in my life. And I've been fortunate to go to a number of different places around the world to do so. I started thinking about the story about Mount Tambora's eruption and the impact of this on Mary Shelley's writing of Frankenstein. And I thought that this would be an interesting project to pitch to the residency, thinking not only would it fit well with this environment of being, on Lake Geneva, how it has a direct connection to the place that I would be, going to make work, but also thinking about my own interests, looking at historical moments, particularly those related to the environment and arts and culture, and to revisit this while thinking through our current circumstances when it comes to climate and climate change. So to give you a little bit of backstory, or like a little bit more insight into a couple pieces that I've made prior, these are some images from a body of work called Fragments of an Imagined Place, which revisits Robert Smithson's unrealized earthwork, Glass Island, Atlantis. Again, those of you unfamiliar with Robert Smithson, he was an American land-based artist, primarily working in the 60s and 70s, and he made a lot of large-scale interventions in the landscape. His most notable being Spiral Jetty, which you can see here, so that might be one that you're familiar with. So, but just before he had made Spiral Jetty, which is his kind of first huge permanent earthwork, Smithson had proposed to fill a small little island off the coast of Vancouver Island with 100 tons of glass shards. On the right, you can kind of see a sketch of that. And on the left, you can see the island, which I went to go and visit. He had proposed this, but when kind of some publicity started coming out in local newspapers, environmental protesters started getting involved, thinking that putting all these glass shards on an island might not be the best idea, considering that a lot of birds and seals visit the island and it could endanger them. And so while the glass was actually being shipped up to be installed, the British Columbian government reneged its agreement that he could use the island. And so it became an unfulfilled or unrealized work. And in a way, I thought that this failure of this dream, in a way, is almost more representative of Atlantis, which was going to be kind of the subtitle of this work. So I really like this as, the failure as being part of, this process. This is from a 2-channel video installation called A Poetic Truth and a Pathetic Fallacy. It's a 16-minute video which documents the Black Mambas, which was an all-female anti-poaching unit in South Africa. And they're involved in active fighting against poachers, and also hold a community education program that teaches sustainable conservationist philosophies. And so my piece intertwines footage of them and their work alongside imagery of the rhino poaching, and thinking of also historical misconceptions of the rhinoceros. One being Durr's woodcut, which is a famous artwork housed in the British Museum, and Durr's rhinoceros is kind of served as like this prototype for what all rhinoceroses would look like for 300 years in any sort of sketch or natural history book or anything that you'd come across. It was based off of Durr's, even though it was completely inaccurate. And so my piece kind of weaves together these like complications of like truth in a sense, and how truth can be, through kind of the chain and, almost like a game of telephone or something can be really, really warped. And also thinking through issues of globalization and extinction. So in creating The Year Without a Summer, I also created some photographs, and you'll see a couple slides that show this. To set off, I knew that I wanted to visit both sites in question. I find I have to go to the place to create the work, just like I went to the island where Smithson was going to make the glass island, just like I spent time in South Africa with the Black Mambas. I knew I wanted to go to Mount Tambora and to Lake Geneva. And my concept was to try to marry these two these are two images, Mount Tambora and Lake Geneva, and the way that they're positioned, one, the Mount Tambora image is printed on a transparency, and that hangs in front of the image of Lake Geneva, and so the two landscapes almost become and collide into one when you look at it from a certain vantage point. Another way that I did this was also putting together in a triptych images from the top of Mount Tambora, as well as an image from Lake Geneva as well, to kind of create kind of a seamless piece that's almost like one image. And so the film is really kind of the crux of the project. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about, the back, kind of how I went through the production and thoughts that I was having, and reiterate a few main themes in the film. So I first set off to go to Mount Tambora to hike to the top of the volcano to shoot. And so on the left, you can see a map, just so you have an idea of kind of where Mount Tambora is situated. And on the right is like the plaque at the bottom of Mount Tambora, which also explains a little bit of the history of its eruption and its effect. And so this was in June 2019. I flew to Sumbawa with my friend and assistant Nick. And here I met a Dutch expat who lived on the island named Rick. So I have a Nick and a Rick in the piece. And Rick is the one who organized the hike and arranged so I could have some guides take me to the top of the mount of the volcano. And so we started off at the camp at the foot of the volcano near his house. And the hike was 3 days long, 2 days up, and then 1 day down. The night before we set off for the hike, I had a really bad bout of food poisoning, which did not make the trip much easier. And it really became much more of a struggle than I expected, carrying too many cameras, it being a little more arduous. There's not many switchbacks. It's pretty much just going straight up. And, by the time you get up there, you're exhausted. And I had such a brief window of opportunity to shoot, really thinking about the light, trying to get a sunset and then the sunrise. And because I was primarily shooting on a Bolex 16mm camera, and I was also shooting medium format and large format still shots, I had a lot that I was trying to manage. And while Nick did some of the shooting, I primarily do most of the shooting myself. And I guess I'm just kind of telling this just so that you have an idea of a bit of the working process that, while oftentimes like films have like huge crews, I'm usually like a crew of one and maybe an assistant. And so this experience of my travels to Indonesia and hiking up the mountain, it weaves its way into the piece, as do my conflicting feelings of my subject position as a foreigner making a work in a place that's not my own. And this is something I grappled with in the Poetic Truth piece in South Africa, and something I wanted to more overtly address in this piece. And so this piece kind of really morphed more and more into something that became personal that I didn't intend it to be. After my trip to Indonesia, I immediately went to Lebec, the residency on Lake Geneva. And I spent 3 months as an artist in residence here, the same amount of time, as you can see, as Mary Shelley had spent. And the residency provided a small stipend, and I was working alongside 7 other residents on the lake, and there were always people coming to visit and whatnot. And so really thinking about this community environment, it very much mimicked the experience of Mary Shelley's, us both being on Lake Geneva in the summertime, surrounded by a community of creative people for 3 months. The biggest obstacle by far that I encountered in the 3-month stay that I had at Lebec was about halfway in. I was diagnosed with a fracture in my hip, which was somewhat a result of not properly treating a sprained ankle from the Tambora hike, among other things. And so I ended up spending the remaining half of my residency on crutches, which made shooting very difficult, and it confined me basically to the grounds of the residency itself. And so at first this was rather devastating, but in the end I was able to kind of work it into the piece and think through it in the sense of, if Mary and her circle were confined to the house, so was I. And so this limitation really made me consider, and like I had to create workarounds, and it really made me consider and like look further into compounding the parallels between Mary's summer and mine. And so when conceiving the project, I had an idea to cast a contemporary group of characters to act as stand-ins for Mary Shelley and her circle. But as I spent time at Lebec, I realized that the residents themselves were almost like, basically the circle, and, I should make this a more overt part of the piece. And so thinking about me hanging out with the other artists and Mary Shelley hanging out in Diodati with Byron, Shelley, Polidori, and Claire, this kind of became a crux or kind of a focal point. The main two characters in the film are Mary and her sister Claire, and I really wanted to give the women prominence as they were often overshadowed by their male counterparts in their day. And while Mary is clearly the protagonist of the film, I focus not only her writing of Frankenstein, but also her biography, thinking about her struggles dealing with male writers of the day, as well as her position in relationship to motherhood. And this becomes one of the main themes in the film, and also a driving force in the concept of Dr. Frankenstein giving life. This contrasts with the theme of death that was persistent in Mary's life, the loss of 4 of her 5 children, her mother days after she was born, her husband, Percy by Shelley, died prematurely. So Mary's experience with death is contrasted with the many lives lost during the year without a summer. Claire is also another key character in the film, and she's the only character that's given her own voice. She's the only character who gets to speak. And in a way, I did this because I wanted her to set the record straight. Claire was very under-recognized during her lifetime, even though I feel just like learning more about her biography that she was a really extraordinary woman. And so my aim was to literally give her a voice. And so she's able to use her own voice to call out the misogyny and mistreatment that she faced, particularly at the hands of Byron. And within the film, I also added a few little references of films and filmmakers that I found to be influential. So this, shot is a mimic of a shot that Ingmar Bergman uses a lot. And in a way, I wanted this to kind of fit into our subconscious, this idea of artists building off of the work of other artists who came before them. And I also wanted to acknowledge the concept of artists being the subject for other artists, which have a long-standing history. In this segment, for instance, I worked with Mbaye, who was also on the residency for me, and he poses for the camera, my camera, similarly as Delacroix poses for Jericho in his Raft of the Medusa, and kind of performs the gestures that the painting shows. At the same time, it also kind of throws back this theme of the colonial gaze and the camera, and thinking about how Mbaye being from Senegal, and in this artwork it being a Senegalese or a colonial ship that was sailing to Senegal. I just kind of wanted to subtly kind of mimic these two things or put them together. And at the same time, kind of this these acts of colonialism that are through the Western gaze is also reinforced in the scene at the foot of Tambora, where I discuss Jean Rouche's Les Maîtres Fous. The film also makes a number of art historical references. The motif of the Wanderer, based on Caspar Friedrich's painting, is repeatedly referenced, both to reinforce the romantic notion of man alone in nature, but also to contrast the references of loneliness, alienation, that my script as well as passages of Frankenstein possess. And there's a big segment that's also devoted to Turner, how his art shifts in the year of 1816, as witnessed in his sketchbooks, where you can see him changing. And he had all these sketchbooks, furiously sketching, the changing skies, because the sky, really shifted and the colors were all different because of Mount Tambora's ash blowing through. which is sort of reminiscent of what many of us are experiencing. I know here, at least, the wildfires in the West have been creating, sometimes like these beautiful but deadly looking skies. And when I was making the piece, for instance, there were smokes and wildfires in Brazil that were so strong that it blocked out the sun, just the same as the weather conditions that appeared right after Mount Tambora's eruption. So I started really kind of, paying attention to these rapidly changing climate ice is another theme that kind of runs throughout the film, not only as the backdrop of Frankenstein itself, but also furthering the concepts of expeditions and exploration. And I'm also able to kind of weave into this, moment observations, my own, into the piece, having grown up in Canada, where it's pretty much winter from October until May. And also to comment like on our current realities of melting ice sheets and rising sea levels. And so kind of in this whole section of the film, it really starts to ramp up and address, our climate crisis. And while in 1816, the people didn't have an understanding, in Europe or North America, what was causing this erratic shift in the weather. But today we have a good understanding as to why we are having these like extreme weather conditions. But I guess I wonder like why we have this knowledge, but as a society, we're not maybe positioning ourselves in a position to fully combat it, or at least not at the rate that it needs to be. And at the same time, as an artist, I have to address my own use of carbon-fueled travel, rare earth minerals in the devices that I make my work. I'm zooming to you guys now. And so while I'm critiquing the system, I also need to recognize my own complicity. And this is something I struggle with as an artist and as a person, and it's constantly on my mind, and both in the framing of this work, but also like how to make work that addresses these concerns. And so in this piece, I found that the way to address these concerns was to address the personal, to address Mary's story, to address the stories from Tambora, as well as my own stories, as a way to kind of think about our current reality. And what I didn't expect in 2019 when I began this work was how prophetic the piece would be. I mean, all of us are experiencing a collective change to life as we know it. We've been forced to stay at home. We've been hit by a grave loss of many lives. And we feel an uncertainty of maybe what the future holds. And so the question that I continue to pursue as an artist is, how do I make work in a time where the world feels like it's on the brink? What are the stories that matter, and what are the stories that I want to share? And so with that question in mind, I'll just talk for just like a minute further about like the current work or current research that I'm working on, and then I'll turn it back to questions. So I've been starting to work on a project really thinking about green energy and how this race towards green energy, I'm wondering, like, is it really green? And how some of it is embedded in the mythology of the American West as a site of possibility and conquered with dreams of manifest destiny, but at whose expense? And so I've been filming at the Tesla Gigafactory site, kind of thinking about this concept of progress and futurity, and how it's being promoted and built on antiquated notions of, kind of the new and, again, like this idea of green energy, something that's, supposed to help us out in the future. But actually there are some grave effects to this, nothing in the name of progress is all good. And so while, Elon Musk is like promoting it as like, come where the wild horses roam free, a lot of the wild horses, their way of life's being threatened as Tesla, has built this mega gigafactory, and all the sites around it are these like huge factories, which are, you know, cutting off transportation ways. You know, horses are getting hit by cars and whatnot. And so I'm interested in kind of in this balance. I'm also interested in this idea of like, where does this energy come from? And how green energy is relying on resources such as lithium, which are being extracted at rapid paces and in like non-generatively from fragile ecosystems such as the Atacama Desert in Chile. And so in November, I traveled for a 3-week residency where I worked with indigenous conservationists in Atacama to get a better understanding of their link to land, how they have worked for many, many years in these harsh conditions, and how mining practices are threatening this. And in a way to think about how extractive practices are a continued form of colonialism. Who are they benefiting and who are they hurting? And so I really want to kind of think about this idea of how in the name of progress, we often overlook the destructive elements that come to play. And so that's kind of my current mode of research. And so, you know, I'll see kind of as I get into the editing process, how the piece shapes up to be. So thank you for listening to my talk. I'm going to end that there.
I'm muted, sorry. Hi, yes,
Hi.
Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation and the images to accompany it. So yeah, thank you. And I want to remind everyone in the audience that you're welcome to type questions or comments into the Q&A, and we'll take some time to answer those. I'm watching the time here. It's 5 till 8, so we'll give this about 15 minutes for everyone. So while people are thinking and figuring out how to articulate their questions, I thought I would start with something which is 1816. So you said that people at the time did not know what caused this. And you mentioned, intriguingly at the beginning, you mentioned that the Sambawans, is that the proper way to say the people's name? The Sambawans had this narrative about it that was sort of a colonial, it was retribution against colonialism. So I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about that, if you know any, and also what did the rest of the world think had caused this shift in the weather? And when did they learn otherwise? I think you said it was quite a while after, it was a number of years.
Yeah, so it was about, from my understanding, it was about like 150 years later that like kind of 2 and 2 were put together. Because Indonesia was a colony at the time, there were actually records that were kept of that went, I think it was to England. Yeah. And so I'm not sure exactly like who kind of put it all together, but scholars years later, because they had the records of, you know, when this eruption had happened and, you know, like the devastating effects and whatnot. Yeah, but it was well into the mid 1900s basically that the two are kind of put together, which explained, you know, what happened. And as far as like, yeah, kind of this like the colonial, the retribution, from my readings and what I had researched, there was things that basically like the colonialism made the gods angry, and because, you know, basically that this was allowed, then, you know, they're like the gods are angry and want to counterstrike against this, and like as in the simplest, you know, of terms. And so that became also kind of like one of the narratives that the Sambawans, you know, kind of like used as to have an understanding of why did this volcano erupt. So,
of course, interestingly, Mary Shelley writes this metaphor about a creation, a human machine, not machine exactly, but a unnatural creation. And was there a sense that there was, I mean, not the colonial, but some sense that human invention had caused this? The creatives who were in that small group, but also Europe at large, the intellectual community, was there some sense that this was being caused by people, or was it just completely mysterious?
I mean, from what I understand, it was like really mysterious. People just did not know what was happening. And, there's it didn't really have like the science to support it, or the idea that something that's happening so far away would have an effect. I think that the fact that something's happening in Switzerland and it's also happening maybe in England a bit, like, okay, that, that's kind of making a little more sense. But yeah, from what I mean, I'm not a scientific scholar, so I can't speak to it. But from the research that I did, I couldn't find any real evidence of people, having at least having an explanation grounded in science, So, but what is interesting too is like, Mary Shelley was quite interested, just kind of like, Mary Shelley's interest in science, like the idea of giving, like creating life or whatever. She had witnessed a galvanism experiment of kind of, I think it was like a frog kind of adding electric bolts and like seeing the frog's legs jumping in Scotland, maybe a year or two prior to her writing Frankenstein. And so kind of believed, and I think it's a pretty, educated guess that, that's kind of what trickled into, her writing of, how Frankenstein gives life, of these possibilities of science as well. And like, what science can offer and how that is going to shift and change the world. So I think she was quite attuned to these kinds of thought processes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And you could go in many directions you have in your research. I was also very interested to hear that you were addressing and confronting and even struggling with this sort of colonial gaze of the camera, which is, something that people have felt in different contexts, but for an artist whose work is very much camera based and who travels, you must be aware of that in
woman, often funded by some sort of funding body that's able then to go and to make work. So that's also a reason that I try to spend time in the place that I'm going. I don't want to feel like I'm just using it, but that I'm actually kind of like putting myself into the situation as well, so that that it is kind of coming from my perspective, that it is coming from my experience, but also that I recognize that there are problematics that go hand in hand with this, that are beyond, maybe necessarily what I can solve. But I just try to go into the situation as respectfully as I can. And I never, working with the Black Mambas, for instance, I consider a collaboration. It wasn't, just me coming in and filming. And in this piece, I don't really like film, like the people in Indonesia so much. I kind of like create a little bit of distance from that. It's just a little bit more of the surrounding. So it becomes like less about them and more about kind of this place, and thinking about these histories as well. And how, and how, like colonialism has this effect, and it's a continued and lingering another.
Yeah, interesting, especially using the terms extractive economies and in your work, your current project, interesting that even in telling a story or looking at something visually, you're extracting something, but the fact that you're aware of that is just fascinating. It's really interesting and great. I wanted to call your attention to a question that one of our audience members has asked. Jason Cooper, actually an artist and one of our librarians. As an artist who works in multiple media, how do you decide which to use when approaching a project?
Well, yeah, I was trained as a photographer, so I always kind of, I feel like I always start and end with photography in a way. So I really do see the world through that way. And even the way I shoot, I feel like I shoot like a photographer. I have some sort of motion, but a lot is kind of like what comes into the frame of the camera. With the 16 millimeter, for instance, I started using 16. I used a project many, many years ago, and then I was using video. And then with the Blue project that I spoke a little bit about, I purposely wanted to use 16 millimeter for that project because it dealt with a bit of part of the film deals with the history of, photography and how that, how that like evolved into motion picture making. So because the medium itself needed it, that's the reason I used 16 for that. For this project, when I started, I went up to Tambora with like literally every camera that I had because I was like, okay, here's my opportunity. I don't really know what the piece is going to be yet, and I just wanted to capture everything that I could. And in hindsight, and what I've learned is like maybe try not to do so much with so many things and just focus. And the footage that I have on 16, I mean, it is very seductive in this way. And I also do like the limitations of it as well, that, a roll of film that I have on my Bolex is only 2.5 minutes long. I have to crank for each shot, and the most I can get is 30 seconds. And so, you're kind of like left with only so much material, whereas sometimes like video can seem endless. And so, yeah, there's something about these limitations that I do like. And also with this piece, I really wanted time to be questionable. Like some of it almost looks like it could be from like the 70s or something, but then all of a sudden you're like brought into like with the phone, shooting off of the phone. Okay, now I know I'm contemporary. And so I really wanted to play with this idea of time, much like the piece, it's like what was happening 200 plus years ago feels very prescient today, just like what's happening on one side of the planet feels very much today too. So not to think of time necessarily as linear, but that it's, constantly, kind of circling around us.
Great, wonderful. Timothy Plashik, he's a professor here as well. He deals a lot in technology, mainly audio, but he asks, many of your works incorporate 4-channel audio. What are your artistic and design approaches to multi-channel audio?
So this is the first one. I've done multi-channel screens, but this is the first one that I had actually with 4-channel sound. And it's still something that I'm kind of working with. I mean, obviously for you guys watching, you only had the 2 speakers. But the idea for me was that like in an immersive environment, you'd have like 2 speakers in the front, 2 speakers in the back. And so sometimes the voice comes through the back, sometimes the voice is coming through the front, or sometimes you feel that you're being surrounded or, by the ambient sound as well. Because I'm shooting on 16, it's silent when I'm shooting, and I am not a sound person at all. And I mean, it's hard enough to just shoot, never mind if I had to record as well. And so all of the recording is done and placed in after by my brilliant sound engineer, Jackie, who I worked with for this. And yeah, it's something that I kind of want to kind of push further, because I like this idea of like sound can really make you feel immersed in the environment. They say, if your sound is good, but your image isn't as good, like you can kind of get away with a lot. So, while maybe I have sometimes moments of like a bit of shaky camera work, if the sound is there, it can hold the piece together. So yeah, it's something I kind of want to keep pushing.
So in a gallery, I guess if we were viewing your piece in a different setting, an art setting, we would have the surround sound. That was something I hadn't thought to even ask.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so we would be looking at the screen, and what size ideally would we be?
I mean, I've shown it installed a few different times. I mean, I try to make it as big as I can in the space. I liked it to be like floor to ceiling, basically, is the idea, so that, you know, you're really kind of, again, I like to create kind of an immersive environment. And it's been difficult because I finished editing this piece in 2020, and I had the piece open, you know, in an exhibition in Canada, and I couldn't go. So, and then the exhibition closes prematurely. And so in a way, this piece has definitely been experienced a lot more online, or, you know, through kind of like online screenings. And I see the work. And so while of course my preference is to, you know, see it and experience it in this like immersive environment, I would rather show it like this than not show it at all. I'm pretty flexible when it comes to that. So and hopefully it'll get to be, you know, it's been exhibited like, I guess 3 times where it's been properly installed. So, and I've gotten to see 2 times. So yeah, at least I got to see it.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure in seeing it in person, you get that jarring of that meshing of time also, because there's sort of like, you have lots of film references, like silent film with the text going on and the voices not exactly matching what's being said, but then having this very slick surround feeling. I mean, all of that I'm sure adds to that kind of displacement that you feel in watching your film. Yeah. So yeah, I would like to see it in that setting. Let's hope this all fizzles out quickly and we can return to immersive art.
I mean, it's been an interesting project of just how prescient it is for this moment. And I can't believe this moment is continuing, but so it is. So, but also again, like these things of, you know, as artists, how do we adapt? And, you know, like in any project that I have kind of an idea, and then I go and then something happens, which makes me have to change it. So, yeah.
All right, let's see. Let's take one more question since we have one from an audience member, Katie Mikovich. In general, why do you choose photography instead of a traditional media? Traditional, I suppose, being more materials other than digital. Do you feel more expressive with photography, or are there other reasons?
I mean, a lot of it boils down to just my background and training. Like I went to Ryerson University, which is, they're changing their name in Toronto, and I studied photography, and I didn't know whether I would go in an artistic realm or commercial realm, you know, when I first started. And then kind of by my, you know, 3rd and 4th year there, I knew I wanted to, you know, go towards work as an artist. And then, so I really only worked in my undergrad in photography and film and video and stuff like that. And then when I was doing my master's at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, it was, you know, very, you know, free reign and whatnot. I'll say I really can't draw. So, you know, sometimes it's just like, what are you capable of? And also like, in a way, like, I really do think like, I just do see the world like through kind of a lens-based eye. I pay so much attention to time of day and light, and, you know, even just, like, you know, I'm always kind of framing things up, like how I position myself. And it's just kind of how I see things. And for me, it's just, it's kind of, I guess, like a way of like how I know how to work, but also just how I see how to work. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a closing sort of question or thought is, I love that the cyanometer, you know, this idea that, you know, cameras or even just devices for seeing were sort of doors into knowledge, and that you're attracted to that for exactly what you're saying, that you you see the world as this, that you're looking at through this lens, but then here's this person who was trying to understand distances and prove it by using the same instruments that you're using to
there's this nice idea of kind of it's like, oh, to capture something in like film or photography as being like truth, but it's actually not at the same time. I mean, photography's been manipulated since day one, and I do like that kind of slippage at the same time. But it also is like our way of, you may not have, most of you probably maybe never been to Indonesia or to Sumbawa, but then through, my imagery, like I take you there. And so like how really we do understand the world in a sense through this lens-based media in a lot of ways. So, well,
you told us how the rhinoceros could be wrongly depicted with the pen and ink, so you can't blame the lens. It little something else going on there, human knowledge transfer. So yeah, absolutely. Well, I am so pleased that you came this evening, even though you're in Los Angeles and we're in Kentucky. It was wonderful to have you here in this digital way, and that you were willing to share your entire piece with us. And hopefully we will all, be able to follow you and find your work in an immersive setting someday. And I look forward to that, especially, and I'm looking forward to this work on lithium mines and what Tesla's doing, because it's such a thorny conundrum, this need for lithium and recyclable energy, renewable energy and battery storage, and yet there's still extraction going on. So we're all working through this together. So thank you for being an artist who's helping us work through this.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you allowing me to come and have this opportunity. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or things come up in the future. So
yes, we very well may. So once our artists have time to look through this, and the rest of us as well. So again, thank you very much, and thanks to the audience for joining us this evening. And I will. Oh, I did not post in the chat. Let me very briefly, before we go offline, let me post the website where future events, there it is, if everyone can, whoops, I didn't chat everyone. Hold on just a moment. So for future events like this, you can check this website to see the calendar for the rest of the year through May term. And as I said, for those of you who are internal to Transy, you can also look at the Dean's page for upcoming events. And also I will be posting a recording of tonight on that site for those of you who missed it. So thank you again, Elise Rasmussen, and thanks to everyone, and have a safe and warm evening wherever you are. So good night, all.
Thanks, good night.